Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth.
Hello and welcome to the Family Beacon podcast. I'm Moses Brattrud. I'm not here with my co-host Grace Evans today, which is very sad. But as you probably know, we had like 15 inches of snow, and Grace is at the mercy of the plows in the city of Minneapolis, and they did not come through. And her street has not been plowed. Her vehicle was not able to make it out of the out of the street. So it's just me today. And that's a bummer for a couple reasons. Sad trombone, because Grace brings the energy and so many good things to this podcast. So I miss her. And I wanted to still do this podcast, though, because there's so many important things that have come up this week that I want to talk to you about that I think really get to the point of this podcast, getting the facts so that you can stand for truth. So first of all, on Tuesday, I had the chance to go to the Capitol, and I went to the Reproductive Freedom Lobby Day, hosted by an organization called Unrestrict Minnesota and an organization called Gender Justice. And it was very interesting. There were about 150 people there, and I went. So they had been meeting all day, and I think they had some type of sessions, and then they met with legislators, and then I think it was at 2 p.m. there was a kind of a capstone rally. There were about 150 people in the rotunda and in the balcony looking down, and the program was moderated by a Unitarian priestess who's also I'm not sure she calls herself a priestess, the leader of a Unitarian congregation in Minneapolis. And she was also the plaintiff in a lawsuit that targeted many of Minnesota's common sense pro-life regulations. So that lawsuit is ongoing. So that was interesting. I think some of the things I really want to focus on, and I'm actually going to include a clip here. There was a representative who spoke, Representative Vang Her. She represents a district in St. Paul. And she's the chair of the Reproductive Freedom Caucus in the Minnesota House. And she talked about the PRO Act, which passed a few weeks ago, which was signed into law, but also about what she calls the repealer. And that's the bill number is HF 91, and that's a very long bill, which is supposed to accompany the PRO Act. And it's sort of the how-to act that really would repeal a ton of pro-life legislation. We've talked about this on the podcast. I won't get into the details again. But this is what Representative Vang Her had to say.
We passed the PRO Act, and we should be very proud of that. But I've been very disappointed this past week. I've been really filled with a lot of feels because we are having a hard time with the repealer. And we were very clear, and advocates were very clear that the PRO Act and the repealer had to go together. Lee Finke, come up here. Don't stand there. Come join us up here. Make sure everybody's here. Anybody who's a legislator, come on up here so everyone can see all of the hard work we're doing. I am super upset because the repealer is only removing laws that have already been deemed as unconstitutional. And yet, we have members in our caucus who cannot vote for the repealer. We were sent here and we got the trifecta. And I know this for a fact because I knocked doors from the North Shore to Moorhead to Mankato and all around the Twin Cities. And the number one issue I heard was reproductive rights. That's right. You all, and this issue is the reason why we have the trifecta right now. And yet, we are afraid to do the work that you've asked us to do. And, I'm not usually this frank, but I will say that I was really upset because it is a few white men who are standing between us and being able to get this across the finish line. And the reason why I point that out is because we as women have been told our entire existence that our body only matters if it is doing something for other people. If other people are the ones telling us how we can use our body, they're the ones who tell us what we can and cannot do with it. And I am really tired of other people telling us what to do with our bodies. I love my colleagues, and I'm not trying to disparage them, but I am saying that I am calling them out now to stand with us, because sure, I can move some things out of that repealer bill. I can change a few things, I can amend things, but the truth is that every single thing that has been included in that repealer needs to be taken away. And it is because of that that I will not stop fighting. I was brought to this country. I was born in a country where women had no rights. My grandfather did not fight in a secret war. My parents did not cross a river and have half of our family die in the process of escaping. To get me to a country where I was told that I had ultimate freedom, and to have happened what Dobbs did to us, and what we are saying now, what I have the right to with my body, and what my children have the right to their body, Minnesota needs to be the place that continues to allow people to choose what they want to do with their bodies. My family did not fight this hard in order for me to get to a place in which this country is telling me I do not have rights. And that is why here in Minnesota, we will continue to fight. We will continue to ensure that we enshrine a woman's and a person with uterus's right to do what they choose with their body and to be able to make decisions and reproductive decisions for themselves. Thank you so much for you all being here. We can try to do what we can and dismantle on the inside, but without you pushing from the outside, we cannot get this done. So continue to fight with us, continue to be our partners, because we will make sure we get this across the finish line with all of us together.
So what you hear Representative Wenger saying is essentially that what we're doing, what you and I are doing as pro-life Minnesotans, getting the word out about these bills is working. Legislators are hearing from constituents who do not want Minnesota to become a state where abortion is less regulated than going to the hair salon, less regulated than pet stores and things like that. And I want to share another quote from Senator Jen McEwen from Duluth, and she was the bill author of the PRO Act in the Minnesota Senate. In the same rally, she said, and I'm quoting from a news article about the rally, she said, "Sometimes politicians get scared. You have a core group of champions in the legislature, and we are ready to fight, and we will throw down for these values," that is to say, quote unquote, reproductive freedom. But there are other people who are scared. They're scared. They're hearing terrible fire and brimstone messages from certain small minorities within our state who want to take away people's fundamental rights. Now, of course, that's the language that people use to talk about abortion, that it's some sort of fundamental right. And that's never been true, but that's the language that that Senator McEwen is using. Now, just think about that. What she's saying is that people are hearing from Minnesotans. And what she's saying is contradictory, right? Because at first she's saying that this is a tiny minority. But if it's a tiny minority, then why are senators scared, in her words, of what pro-life people are saying? That contradicts itself. What's actually true is that pro-life people are a huge contingent of the population of Minnesota, and we are making our voice heard. You have called your senators, you've called your representatives, perhaps you've used our system to email your representatives and senators, and you've told them that you do not want Minnesota to be a state where unregulated abortion on demand, paid for by the taxpayer up until the moment of birth, is the law of the land. And so I hope that they're getting the message. I hope that legislators in St. Paul are hearing from you. And just as the snowstorm stopped everything here, I look at the parking lots, everything's empty around here. The Senate and the House are not in session today because of the snowstorm that we had. I hope that our activity, the activities of pro-life Minnesotans, are having a similar effect on these radical pro-abortion bills. We had one pass, the PRO Act. That's a big deal, and that is, we're going to be unfortunately reaping the bad consequences of that bill for years to come. But these other bills are, if anything, even more damaging, and the fact that they're not moving forward is amazing. It's progress. So that is what we're going to continue to do. You and I, as pro-life Minnesotans, we need to continue to stand up. We need to continue to make our voices heard. We need to continue to show that we will not be silenced. We will not let this legislative majority steamroller over the actual values that real Minnesotans have, rather than the radicals, what the radicals in the quote-unquote reproductive freedom caucus want us to have. So that's what I'll say on that topic. Well, actually, before I close on that, it's so interesting to go to these pro-abortion rallies. It's I noticed again the strangely religious nature of the pro-abortion movement. So the MC, as I mentioned, was a Unitarian woman, the leader of a Unitarian congregation. There were other speakers there was a Jewish cantor. She's a woman who leads chanting or singing at a synagogue, and a pastor from a denomination called the United Churches of Christ, a very liberal denomination. And that gentleman, he really laid it all out. He said something along the lines of, and you can watch the video, so I don't feel the need to quote directly, but I'll try to be as accurate as I can. He said something along the lines of, if you don't have faith in a pregnant person, it's always a pregnant person, it's never a pregnant woman anymore. If you don't have faith in a pregnant person to make the decisions they need for their own bodies, then you don't have enough faith. And if you believe in a God who wants to control people's choices, who wants to ban people from getting the health care they need, then your God isn't big enough. And people are yelling and cheering and screaming. They love hearing this, the pro-abortion people. And Lieutenant Governor Penny Flanagan, right? She's the second highest ranking person in our state government. She said that the PRO Act, this heinous bill that was passed a few weeks ago, was an answer to prayer, a prayer that she prayed after the Dobbs decision struck down Roe v. Wade. And I just thought that was just really interesting. I think humans are really religious animals, Homo sapiens, Homo religiosus, right? When people are not channeling that religious energy toward the true God, the triune God who created the universe and who redeems and saves us, other things become objects of religious devotion. The so-called abortion rights movement is a perfect example of this. So instead of rejecting religion like you might expect that they would do, they try to reshape it to meet their needs. They try to reshape the God who loves and ordains all human life, who puts a value on all human life, as this rubber stamp deity who wants women to have as many abortions as they want, presumably. And of course, that's just a mirror, right? That God is not really in existence. It's just people yelling into the universe and imagining that they're hearing something back, hearing their own values echoed back to them. So that's my take on the religious nature of the abortion rights movement. Now, before we, what I also want to talk about is, again, something we've covered on this podcast, and I won't rehash everything, because what I really want you to do with this bill, HF 146, the kidnapping bill, please go back and watch the sections of the episode we did a few weeks ago with Rebecca Delahunt, our acting director of public policy, because she really broke down what that bill is, what it does, how it could potentially take away parental custody for kids who come to the state, who come to Minnesota to receive so-called gender-affirming care, and their parents are not in agreement to that. Again, we're talking about minors here. And that bill, unfortunately, the news this week is that bill has more momentum than we unfortunately thought it would, and it is heading to the House floor. We could see a House floor vote. We could see more Senate committee hearings. We could see a Senate floor vote. We could see this sent to the governor's desk. And this is just absolutely, these legislators are living in cloud cuckoo land if they think that this is something Minnesotans want. I have some polling data for you to share on this. 78% of Americans oppose radical, quote-unquote, gender-affirming surgeries for minors. 78%. I've seen, and that includes, and I should stress, it includes 85% of independent voters and 53% of Democrats. Okay, so that's a national survey. Think about Minnesota. I don't have numbers for you in Minnesota, but what I do have is I did have a recent poll in question. I don't think I can share this publicly, the whole poll, but this was the question, and this was asked in another state close to us. Should courts allow children to be taken away from their parents and placed in foster care because they won't affirm their child as the opposite sex? So this is exactly what this bill would do. It would take kids away from their parents, place them under emergency state custody if parents do not provide gender-affirming care, so-called. How many Americans would you guess would support such a thing? The answer, according to this poll, and there's more polling that's out there, but this poll says 10%. Again, this is done in another Midwestern state. 10% of people support that. Now, frankly, that's higher than I expected. Frankly, I'm shocked that even 10% of people would support the courts taking custody away from parents for a troubled kid, perhaps with gender dysphoria, who needs compassionate care and treatment, most of all from their loving parents, when all the parents do is refuse to provide so-called gender-affirming care, which let's remember what that is. That is puberty blockers, which interfere with the body's normal development. It's cross-sex hormones, so-called wrong sex hormones, also known as, where you begin, a 14, 15-year-old girl begins to take testosterone. After a few months, she's permanently changed the tone of her voice. After a few more months, she's permanently lost her fertility. That's, and many other lifelong side effects, right? So that is what we're talking about. And then even we're talking about surgeries. I recently was emailing with a woman who had a double mastectomy at age 15. She is healthy. She was normal. She had serious issues with her mental health. She says that herself. But other than she was physically normal. She had no deformity. She didn't have like that cancer gene that sometimes causes people to get a mastectomy, right? She got a double mastectomy at 15 years old. That is what people want. That's why they're advocating this kidnapping bill, because they think that's a good thing. They think it's a good thing when minors are able to access that type of care, because that allows them to fully actualize their real selves or something like that, right? It's all about the gender identity spectrum and things like that. And that's a bunch of hooey. You're actually just hurting kids who are already hurting. You are compounding their misery when you're pushing that type of so-called medicine onto young kids. So I said I wouldn't get on my soapbox about that, but I ended up doing it because it's so hard not to. It's so hard to sit idly by and watch people gaslight you and I as Minnesotans and try to tell us that a majority of Minnesotans support this. Try to tell us that this is a good thing. Try to tell us that so-called gender-affirming care is just exactly what the doctor ordered. Of course, it might be exactly what the doctor ordered, but that doctor does not have these kids' best interests at heart. There was a moment at the hearing a few weeks ago on this bill when the head of the gender clinic at Children's Minnesota said, "Trust me, I'm a doctor," and with no sense of irony, with no sense of how, doctors, obviously, most of them throughout history have done great things for helping people stay healthy and get healthy if they're sick. But if we learned anything through COVID-19 and everything and the aftermath of that, have we not learned that just having someone with the credentials MD after their name or OD or for osteopathic medicine, haven't we not learned that that is simply not enough? We need to know more about a person before we trust them. We don't just need to know their credentials. We need to know whether they have the best interests of their patients at heart, and that really goes along with whether they're promoting really harmful, radical, and life-altering surgery and medication treatments for minors. If you start doing that, I'm sorry, you've lost your credibility as a medical practitioner. And so saying, "Trust me, I'm a doctor," that doesn't cut the mustard. Okay, so what can you do? HF 91, SF 70 in the Minnesota Senate, and HF 146, the kidnapping bill. These two bills are continuing to advance at the legislature. As I said, HF 91 might have slowed down. We could see that pick back up. It's all about whether the members of the so-called Reproductive Freedom Caucus are able to get the votes. If they can get the votes, they'll try to bring it to the floor. HF 146, it looks like it is heading to the House floor. And we need to continue to get active. what Representative Vang Her and Senator McEwen, remember what they're saying. They're saying that legislators are quote unquote scared. They're not scared. They're smart. They're hearing from constituents. Thousands of people, just through our advocacy system alone, thousands of people have taken action and sent messages to their legislators on these bills. And that doesn't even, and on the kidnapping bill, unfortunately, I believe Minnesota Family Council continues to be the only group that sent out advocacy alerts on this. But on the HF 91, this radical pro-abortion bill, other pro-life organizations are banging the drum just as loudly as we are. And so I can only imagine that the amount of email and phone calls that are coming into legislators' office is punishing. And it should be because they need to stop. They need to stop thinking that their narrow election victory in November is justification for what they're trying to do. What they're trying to do, again, with HF 91, we're talking about a bill that would repeal Minnesota's Born Alive Infants Protection Act, which would require medical providers to provide life-saving care to infants born alive during an abortion. So we're talking about literally preventing medical care for babies born alive during an abortion. That's the radicalism of this bill. I'm not shocked that they're having trouble finding the votes for it. So I wanted to close now by talking about something that is really, I think, really important, and that is Lent. Now, not every Christian tradition observes or practices Lent. Lent begins with Ash Wednesday, which is roughly 40 days before Easter. And I'm recording this on Thursday, February 23rd. Ash Wednesday was yesterday, when I was able to take my young daughter to an Ash Wednesday service for the first time. It was a wonderful experience. So Lent is a time where we remember Christ's 40 days in the wilderness. And it is also the time when we prepare ourselves for Easter. It's the time when we think about the necessity of the events of that led up to Easter, the Passion and the Resurrection. We think about our own sin, the greatness of our own sin, and the greatness of God's mercy to us. It isn't a time where we do all these outward observance things of, fasting from this or that and ashes on the forehead. Those things are good, but they should not, and I think for most people do not distract us from actually thinking about what really matters in the season of Lent, which is preparing our hearts to receive the King who was resurrected from the dead, who lives and reigns together with the Father in heaven, who wants to save you from the sin in which you find yourself, who wants to fully bring you to repentance, to extend the richness of his grace and mercy to you. So last night at church, we sang a hymn written by Martin Luther, and it's an adaptation of Psalm 130. And so I want to read a couple verses from Psalm 130 to you now. This is from the King James Version. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let thine ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If thou, Lord, shouldest mark at iniquities, O Lord, who shall stand? But there is forgiveness with thee, that thou mayest be feared. I wait for the Lord, my soul doth wait, and in his word do I hope. My soul waiteth for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. I say, more than they that watch for the morning. Let Israel hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is mercy, and with him is plenteous redemption, and he shall redeem Israel from all his iniquities. And I love that. I love that passage. In Latin, it's known as De Profundis, out of the depths. And it's the setting for many amazing choral pieces, if you like choral music. But it's the story of Lent. We come out of the depths of our sin. If God would mark iniquities and count iniquities, none of us could stand. But with God there is redemption. With God there is forgiveness. And Jesus is the fulfillment. As so often in the Old Testament, Jesus is the fulfillment of this passage. Jesus fully extends the redemption and the forgiveness mentioned in this passage to you and I. And that's what we want to think about during Lent. We don't want Easter to be that one day in the year when we think about Christ's resurrection. We don't want Good Friday to be that one day of the year when we think about the passion and the death of Christ. We want to have an entire season. The whole church year is dedicated to the remembrance of Christ's earthly ministry. Christmas, the church year begins with Advent, and the culmination of it is Easter. And so we're coming into that season. So let's pray. Let's prepare our hearts to receive the King. And now, I'm so grateful that you guys were able to join me today talking about some incredibly important legislative issues, and also humoring me as I talk about the spiritual aspect of this season of waiting and preparation that we call Lent. So thank you so much for joining me on the Family Beacon podcast. Hope to be back with you and with my awesome co-host Grace next week. Until then, this is the place where you can get the facts and stand for truth. Thanks for watching or listening.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.